Hi everyone. David and me wanted to talk about viewpoints, where we get our viewpoints. We were thinking about this because a lot of viewpoints that I had, I didn't realize I was carrying over from my Watchtower days. For example, my feeling about all other religions and Christians were that they were unfaithful, not really serious, not interested in the Bible or Bible teaching. And what I heard about them usually was bad stuff. But all of that came from the Watchtower. So I had to kind of rethink whether or not that was truth, or I had to decide they weren't telling me the truth about other people as well. So the scripture that got us talking about this was the parable that Jesus gives of the sower that goes into the field and sows and finds out that there's wheat and weeds growing together in the field. The field being God's field, but there's weeds in there, and they're growing at the same time with the wheat. So who are the wheat and who are the weeds? In the Watchtower, because they believed we were living in the last days, they said, we're the wheat, this is the harvest time, we're the wheat, we're collecting all the wheat, and all those other guys, they're the bad guys, they're the weeds. So, was this a correct take on things? Maybe I was wrong in kind of carrying that over.
So the why were we believing that when we were Jehovah's Witness related to the time element. It was the harvest time, we thought, and therefore it makes sense that all the wheat are over here and all the weeds are over here. So Babylon the Great, the world empire of false religion, was a perfectly valid way of looking at the world once you assume that you're in the time of the end, if that's the harvest time he meant. But when we left, we had to reevaluate all these positions again. And I remember my shock when I found out that even what I knew about my own country's history, Great Britain's history, was seriously lacking in my education, which had been mostly in the Watchtower fold. I had whole chapters of British history, really world history, missing from my view. One of the shocks I got was finding out about what had happened even in the generation before Russell came along and the generation before his dad came along. From around 1780 to 1860, I had no idea about the existence of a figure as important as William Wilberforce. I don't know if you have heard about this gentleman, but his name meant nothing to me when I was a Jehovah's Witness. And when I left the Watchtower and found out about this man's importance, I went back. Some of you will be aware of this publication, the Watchtower Publications Index from 1950 to 1985. I went back to this index to see if I'd missed something. Did the Watchtower ever talk about William Wilberforce? And to my shock, I found out they hadn't. They hadn't even mentioned him once, according to their own index, although they did mention his son once in the context of a debate the son had with Thomas Huxley about Darwin and evolution. Now, how did they manage to miss someone as important to world history as William Wilberforce? Who is William Wilberforce? Well, about 6 years ago, today, April the 11th, 2012, I finished reading this book. Adam Hochschild, Bury the Chains. Prophets and Rebels in the Fight to Free an Empire's Slaves. Let me just read you the inner jacket, a couple of paragraphs from the inner jacket of this to tell you about the importance of this man of whom I knew nothing. In 1787, 12 men gathered in a London printing shop to pursue a seemingly impossible goal, ending slavery in the largest empire on earth. Along the way, they would pioneer most of the tools citizen activists still rely on today, from wall posters, mass mailings, to boycotts and lapel pins. This talented group combined a hatred of injustice with uncanny skill in promoting their cause. Within 5 years, more than 300,000 Britons were refusing to eat the chief slave-grown product, sugar. London's Smart Set was sporting anti-slavery badges, created by Josiah Wedgwood of all people. And the House of Commons had passed the first law banning the slave trade. However, the House of Lords, where slavery backers were more powerful, voted down the bill. But the crusade refused to die, fueled by remarkable figures like Olaudah Equiano, a brilliant ex-slave who enthralled audiences throughout the British Isles. John Newton, the former slave ship captain who wrote Amazing Grace. Granville Sharp, an eccentric musician and self-taught lawyer. And Thomas Clarkson, a fiery organizer who repeatedly crisscrossed Britain on horseback, devoting his life to the cause. He and his fellow activists brought slavery in the British Empire to an end in the 1830s, long before it died in the United States. The only survivor of the printing shop meeting half a century earlier, Clarkson, lived to see the day when a slave whip and chains were formally buried in a Jamaican churchyard. But this little fella is William Wilberforce, not mentioned in the preface because he's the most famous of all these people.
Yeah. If you want, one thing that's not mentioned in there is the Christian connection.
Yeah.
That these people that we're talking about, most of them were Christians. I don't know, were they all Christians?
I can't say for sure, but almost all of them were.
Yeah, so there was a strong Christian influence here as to seeing the injustice of it and fighting for these people.
And all from different church backgrounds.
Yeah.
Most of them were Anglicans, but there were Quakers, there were Methodists, Presbyterians. It didn't really matter about denomination. It mattered about the cause and the Christian basis of the cause.
Yeah. So if you find a book a little daunting, that one's a big thick one, but the story has been made into a film, which we watched several times with Max. Here's the film, Amazing Grace. It's a great watch, and it highlights the Christian aspect as well in Wilberforce's life. So he was more than a political figure. I found even a lot of Christians didn't seem to know the full story of William Wilberforce. So this was a good thing for changing my opinion about all Christians being, not, if they belonged to any organized religion, they couldn't possibly be good. That was kind of my carryover from my Watchtower days.
So one thing we would urge is that if you do find out more about this subject, pass it on.
Yeah. And this is a good talking point. I mean, this would be a great thing to talk to non-Christians about and to Jehovah's Witnesses about, because they might not know the story either, and it may have an influence on them that, saying something against their group wouldn't have a good influence on.
Well, the parable is, as Vivian indicated at the beginning, the parable yields two interpretations, especially if you think you're in the last days and in the time of the harvest. You're going to think that religion is neatly divided into bad and good. But the truth is, the parable is saying that even though the angels might divide it that way, that's not the way God has divided it. The wheat and the weeds grow together. And the harvest is clearly delineated in the rest of Scripture as the very end, not a period of 100 years or 150 years at the end. The very end, when Christ returns, is the harvest, when he sends forth his angels to divide. So in the meantime, we have to live with the fact that although the enemy is indeed at work in the field, it's not his field. It's the owner of the field. The reason we call it Christendom is because we acknowledge at some level at least that the thing we call Christendom is the domain or the kingdom of Christ. And so it is in the parable. It's his field. He is the one who will decide when it's time to judge and to divide. We are not the ones who should be doing that dividing. So if you can, get a hold of the movie at least, and if you can, get a hold of a biography of Wilberforce, or better still, this that tells the more complete story of how all of these persons, whatever their religious background and denomination, made a contribution to the bringing to an end of the institution of slavery. Bury the chains. Adam Hochschild.